Welcome to As I Live and Grieve, a podcast that tells the truth about how hard this is. We're glad you joined us today. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love and how well-intentioned friends and family try so hard to comfort us. We created this podcast to provide you with comfort, knowledge, and support. We are grief advocates, not professionals, not licensed therapists. We are you. Today we are speaking with Alyse Oram. Alyse's grief journey started in 2016 with the loss of a childhood friend, then her younger brother 6 months later. While processing her loss, she became aware of the limited resources available to sibling loss specifically, and the discomfort she witnessed from others when discussing the topic. While not an expert, Alyse hopes that by sharing her story of loss and grief, she can provide hope and support to others in similar situations. Alyse lives in Maine with her boyfriend and their fur babies, Stella and Harlow.
Howdy to our listeners again today, and thanks so much for coming back and joining As I Live and Grieve. We're here today with a really interesting guest. I think you'll enjoy this conversation. Alyse Oram is here with us today. And before we kind of get started, we're going to wind up talking about loss of a sibling. But before we get started, Alyse, would you just tell our listeners a little bit of your background?
Yeah, thank you for having me. In 2016, I was 28 years old, and on the morning of Thanksgiving of that year, we got word that my brother had passed away in a car accident early that morning. He was 22 years old, and obviously that was a complete shock to all of us. That sort of started me on my grief journey, and been sort of working through those feelings ever since.
Okay. All right. And I ran across Alyse's name in a Facebook group I was in, and the words she spoke about her brother and her loss just made me want to hear more. So we invited Alyse, and I'm so happy that you've joined us today, Alyse. Loss of a sibling, especially when it's unexpected and sudden like that, it's a whole bunch of grief feelings at once. And did you receive this information, I'm curious, by phone call, or did someone come to the door?
So the police came to my parents' door. I was living with them at the time, but I just happened to be house sitting for a friend of mine's parents. So my dad actually had a friend drive him to where I was staying, and he notified me in person.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad somebody at least talked to you in person about it. I've really not lost anyone suddenly like that. So I'm certainly not going to say to you, I know how you feel, because I don't. And we have established through many guests that everyone's grief is different. Now, many people are very familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief and that grief journey. We've talked about those, and we've even added some of our own. We know that it's not a straight line. We know that everybody's grief is different. What were some of your first emotions?
I had a outburst of emotion right when I was told, but immediately after that, I went down into like a shock. I think that's what I would describe it as. And I stayed in a state of shock for quite some time. I think as a coping mechanism, I just could not handle that news in its entirety. So it was almost like I just pulled myself together. The other part of that is I don't have any other siblings. So I think my initial reaction was I need to be with my parents. I need to be okay for them, and just kind of like move forward with whatever was going to be next.
Right. And what you mentioned there, being okay for them, we often do that in our grief. We push back what we need to do for us so that we can help someone else and be there for someone else.
Yeah.
And especially in the family, that's how the dynamic plays out. Had you and your brother had a solid relationship as siblings? Had there been some difficulties?
We were always close, but we were 6 years apart in age. So we didn't have a lot in common growing up. I was always in a little bit of a different stage than he was. And I held a lot of resentment toward him. He was just a completely different person than I was, very outgoing, very athletic. the life of the party, everybody's friend. And I felt like he was maybe the focus of everyone's attention, and I wasn't getting that same kind of attention. I was very jealous of him, which seemed weird to be 12 and to be jealous of like a 6-year-old. That seems crazy,
Yeah.
but that's just how I felt. I felt like the world revolved around him, and I often would tell my parents that my life was ruined by when he was born.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was kind of complicated for a while, but when he started, I think when he graduated high school, both were living in Boston right after that. And we sort of became close then. We were both, more of adults. We could relate to each other. We liked the same music. We could spend time together. We had some overlapping friends. So the last few years of his life, we were much closer. And I would say the last 6 months of his life, we were probably the closest we'd ever been.
Good, good. And because of some of the difficulties you had in your preteen years and everything, do you feel that you suffered any guilt for having felt that way after he died?
To some extent, I think I had worked through that already, but
Okay.
there was some feeling of there was wasted time that I could have spent with us having a better relationship.
Right.
But I think the way it all played out was just kind of the nature of what it was. And we did have a great relationship towards the end. And that's part of the grief, I think, too, is that we were just on the verge of having our whole lives to have a really close relationship. And
Right.
that just did not happen for us.
Right.
Mm.
Right. Did you have any help with your grief? Did you turn to or seek out a therapist or anything, or did you just kind of deal with it yourself?
I dealt with it myself for a little while. And then I have done counseling even since then, on and off. I did seek help from a local organization. It's called the Center for Grieving Children.
Okay.
They are out of Portland, Maine, and they offer free services to anybody of any age. It says for children, but it's for anybody. And they're basically peer support groups. And
Okay.
that was very helpful for me to hear other people's stories that, weren't the same as mine, but it put things in perspective for me. And just was a place to go where everyone just kind of understood. You walk through the door and everyone knows why you're there.
Good, good. I'm glad you sought out and found
Mhm.
some place that could help you. How about your parents? What were your thoughts as you watched your parents grieve?
To be honest, I think I wasn't grieving at first, and I was more watching the people around me grieve and feeling so sad for them, especially my parents. My dad, so broken. That's really hard. He's kind of a tough man on the exterior, and that just to see him so broken, I guess, is
Mhm.
the answer. My mom is a little bit more like me and is kind of just put our big girl pants on and get through what we got to get through.
Yeah,
But it was very hard, and it still is hard to see my
yeah,
dad
Sure.
and the way that's changed him.
right. And I'm sure every Thanksgiving just kind of brings that all back
Mm.
if that's when you received the information. We've talked about that with some other guests, how your holidays are changed. And certainly when you get news like that
Yeah.
on a particular holiday, that stays part of your holiday, that holiday forever. Have you or your parents done anything special to kind of accommodate that happening on Thanksgiving? Have your Thanksgiving traditions changed any?
They have definitely changed. We weren't huge into Thanksgiving before. We're kind of a tight knit family. We don't have a lot of extended family. But the first couple years, we actually went away for Thanksgiving. We
Okay.
went to Florida, and it was just kind of easier to not be at home, I guess.
Right.
And
Right.
we would kind of just treat it like any other day. And we really don't celebrate it now. It's tricky. My boyfriend, that's his favorite holiday. That's the holiday that his whole
Mhm.
family gets together. And so I have gone with him and had a very rotten time. And we're going to try again this year. And I think I'm in a much better place this year to do that. But it's hard when everybody else is kind of into
Right.
it and it's not really our
Right.
thing anymore.
Mhm.
Right. Will this then be the first Thanksgiving that you won't be with your parents?
I believe there has been one other that I was not with them, that maybe they went away to Florida and I chose
Okay.
not to go.
Uh-huh.
But they're okay with that. I they want me to do what's good for me. And as much as I sometimes feel guilty, like maybe I should be with them every time, they support me to do what I need to do. So
yeah, it's part of taking care of yourself, I think.
Right.
You can take the memories with you and everything, but you still need to take care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
We've had conversations with many people around the phrase, just get over it. I mean, you mentioned your mom saying, put on your big girl pants and move on. You don't get over grief, in our opinion. You learn to live with it. Your life changes and molds around it. I know I probably will grieve the loss of my husband for the rest of my life. So it may be the same for your brother. But do you feel that at least you have moved on? Do you feel like you have moved through your journey? Do you still have more to go?
I would say I probably still have more to go. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say the first few years, I don't know that I fully processed what it meant that he was gone. And I think sometimes still in the back of my mind, I think maybe he's just off doing whatever he's doing, and I just haven't heard from him for a while. It gets a little less hard. I was just talking to my mom today and checking in to see how she was feeling, because 5 years is coming right up in a couple weeks.
Yep.
And, I think we're both decided that the anticipation of the day is sometimes worse than the actual day itself. Like, just kind of feeling this dread of this day is coming.
Well said.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't really feel that as much this year, which, knock on wood, it's still have some time, but yeah, I don't feel that way that much this year. So I take that as a good sign that it's just not as raw as it has been in years past.
Mm-hmm. Raw is also a great word.
Yeah.
Have you done any writing or journaling? That's one of the recommended methods or therapies, if you will, to help you cope with grief. Have you done any of that, and did it help?
I sure have. And I have liked to journal since I was a kid. So on and off through the years. Really, I can't remember what the name of the book is, but I went through this book that's basically, it has prompts. You read different sections of it, and it leads you through this whole, the whole past of your relationship with this person, and kind of reconciling different things and apologizing or asking, telling the person through writing what you're mad about and what you wish you could have said. And I felt that was really helpful. I'll try to find the name of that book for you, but it just put it into a different perspective of what were the highs and lows of your relationship, and, go through those things and forgive yourself for some of the things you did do or didn't do.
Right. Very important.
How long do you think, clearly because it was fast and traumatic, how long do you think that shock was with you before you could actually start feeling, not holding it in anymore and just being?
I would say probably started to thaw out a little bit after the funeral, when I was getting back to work. Okay. I think once I was seeing that my regular life was going on around me, and like my work hadn't changed and all this stuff hadn't changed, that really started to sink in that I was a very different person, and the life that I was living was still the same. And I just started to acknowledge that I just sort of felt out of place with my regular friends, and sort of falling into a depression, just the urge to just be at home, to be close to my family. That lasted a long time. I just wanted to be at home. If I wasn't at work, I needed to be home.
Yeah.
Do you think that need to be at home was more out of a sense for your own peace of mind and comfort, or do you think it might have been because you wanted to make sure your parents were okay?
I think at that time it was more me. It just made me anxious to be away from home. It made me anxious when my parents were away from home. I worried that they would get into a car accident, and, this would happen all over again. My dad plays in a weekly pool league, and I remember I would stay up. He's usually home by this time, and I would stay up. And if he was 5 minutes late, I'd be stressing, like, where is he?
Right.
It just added this sense of anxiety. I just needed it. If everybody was home, we were all safe, we're all there, nothing bad's going to happen.
Right. And actually, anxiety is one of those stages of grief that we've added primarily because of a book, Anxiety, the Missing Stage of Grief. And it's very real.
Yeah.
We've both experienced that as well. Do you find that there are triggers for you where you can be kind of going along, everything's going normally in your life, and all of a sudden there will be something that will just kind of bring it all back for you. Are there any triggers like that?
Social media triggers me a lot. When there's thing like a National Sibling Day, or I see people that their siblings are getting married, or even just birthday announcement, things like that, I get sort of rub me the wrong way sometimes. It just can catch me in the wrong way.
Right.
Music does that for me as well. Certain songs bring me right back there.
Sure. And what do you do? Do you have some sort of a coping strategy?
I usually let it out. It doesn't last too long. It usually happens in the car. That's when I'm alone in the car. That's when it kind of hits me.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, I'll cry on my commute home. That's cool with me.
Yeah.
I used to just kind of stuff that away, and that didn't help me at all.
Right.
So
Yeah. Certainly didn't prevent it from happening again, did it?
No.
definitely not.
Did you have solid support from friends, or were you more of a, not necessarily a loner, but were you more independent and didn't really have friends around you that supported a lot?
I was a little more independent. I don't like people fussing over me, and I feel like a lot of people came out of the woodwork right after this happened, and that bothered me. It was people I hadn't heard from in a long time, and I know they meant well, but we just weren't close, and it felt disingenuous to me.
Yeah.
So I have one best friend who just kind of got it, and I don't know how she got it, but we could talk about it if I wanted to talk about it, and I could cry about it, and she understood if I just wanted to change the subject. If I wanted to just talk for 5 minutes about it and it be done. There are days where she would just call me and say, I'm just going to come pick you up and we're going to go do this.
Nice.
And I really needed that, and I love her to death for that.
Good. Yeah, that's important. And you only need one friend like that. That's
Right.
really all you need.
Yep.
I know what you mean about the people that kind of come out from the woodwork. I experienced that when my father died, and I pretty much made a scene at the funeral home because of some people that showed up that hadn't been a part of his life for years and years and years. And it took me a while to get past that myself. So yeah, I know what you mean. And true that they mean it. They mean well, but it just didn't feel genuine to me. So I understand that as well.
Well, another side effect there was I kind of had a don't give a damn attitude right after all of this happened.
Okay.
And so I kind of would tell people, I just thanks, but no thanks. Please don't show up at my house. Please don't, send me a million messages. We had a similar situation at like the after his celebration of life where my mom just had to tell somebody, just please leave. This is, you're just kind of making a scene, and it's not what we need.
Right.
Right.
I wonder if it's on their part, if it's guilt, and that's why,
I think probably a lot of it is that they feel guilty for not having
right,
been
and now they
around,
feel they need to
for
fix
not
it.
having come by. Yes,
So
yes.
yeah,
Whether they
Yes.
acknowledge that or
Right.
not, but I do agree. I think that's part
Right.
of it. What suggestions or advice would you have to offer someone who has a friend or an acquaintance that is experiencing something like this? What would you tell them? How could they help that person? How could they support that person in their grief?
I would say, like my friend did for me, just to be there, not to harp on it, just to be available and understanding. I kind of went off the radar for a long time. Like I said, I didn't want to leave the house, so I really wasn't hanging out with anyone. But this friend of mine, she never took that personally and never made me feel guilty that I hadn't come over and see her daughter, or, the things that we used to do together. She just understood that I was in a bad place and a different place. And even to this day, she'll say, I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago, but she's along for the ride. It's not like, oh, well, you've changed and you're not as fun as you used to be, or you're not whatever. That's no reason to say sayonara, like see you later.
Exactly.
She's just kind of stuck with me. And that's what I would say is just be patient, and you don't have to have any answers. You don't have to have a solution, because there isn't one.
Mm-hmm.
To just say, you know what, that really sucks. And that's something that my friend Carly says to me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
This just sucks. Like, this is stupid. We say that a lot. This is dumb. I can't believe this has happened.
Yeah.
This is stupid. And to have somebody just acknowledge that feeling, to say, yeah, I can see this is ridiculous. This shouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
It means everything.
Yeah. There's a term that I think primarily therapists and social workers use for what your friend Carly did for you. And that was, she held space for you.
Mm-hmm.
She let you do and go through whatever you personally needed to do or go through. And she was just there. She was there in case you needed her. She was there to listen if you needed to talk. She was just there for you. She was holding space, and that's something very, very precious. Right. So that's great. And how about for someone who loses a sibling? What suggestions might you have for them regarding their parents? How could they support their parents, or what do they need to watch out for, maybe, in their parents' grief?
To support their parents, that's a good question, because I don't know how well of a job I've done supporting my parents. I think they would say that I've done a good job, but I think I was just there, and I don't know that I did it right. I think sometimes I was the one to, this is where I'll get emotional. I was the one to show up from work and put a happy face on. Like, if I'm not super upset, then they won't be upset that I'm upset. I don't want to add to their grief. But of course, there are times where I couldn't keep that up.
Sure.
I couldn't always be that. And they would always say, you don't have to be anything for us, but they're just, maybe just being the oldest child, I've always just felt this, I want to make them proud of me and, that sort of thing. And I just want to be there for them. Yeah. I don't know what advice I would give.
It sounds like you have been, and maybe that's the simple answer, is to just be there. And even though there are times you may want to isolate and everything, you still need to make sure that you're there for them.
Yeah, I never wanted them to feel like they lost me in the process of this.
So probably your presence was a huge comfort to them. And maybe at some point you'll hear that from them, as you talk about the experiences. More years fall behind you since this devastating situation. And sometimes there's a tendency to talk about it a little bit more. So many of our guests that come to us, Alyse, they've written a book, or they've done this, or they've started a life coach career, things like that. What are your goals? Obviously grief has touched you and is now a huge part of you. Do you have a wish to do anything with that, or not?
Yeah, so I'm definitely interested in starting my own podcast, just based on, not really about grief in general, but because of the journey in grief that I've been on, there've come a lot of things that I just feel like, why are we not talking about this? When my brother passed away, I was shocked by the number of books that there are about losing a pet, but very few about losing a sibling. And I just thought to myself, why does nobody say anything about that? And then I joined a Facebook group about loss of a sibling, and there are thousands of people in this group. And I just think, well, why is this not a broader subject? Why do we focus on the partner or the parents or that kind of thing? I lost a lot of weight. That was another thing after this happened. I had no appetite. People would make comments about my body that either you need to eat something or, oh, you look great. And that was something that always struck a nerve with me, because I thought, you have no idea how I've lost this weight. Right. It's not healthy. It's not good. I'm not proud of it. And I can't gain weight if I wanted to. So, but that was just another sort of thing on my list. It's like, these are weird things. And I don't know that anybody wants to talk about it. I don't know that I could hold an audience in the circle of friends that I have, or, that would really think about those things. So I would love to talk in depth about things that I just wonder why we don't talk about, that are awkward, that are sort of uncomfortable, because I don't mind talking about the uncomfortable, not anymore.
Yeah, that would be a great podcast. It really would. Yeah, when we started this one, I thought to myself, the only way I'll know if this is a viable thought is if I can come up with a list of topics that will support an episode a week for a whole year. I thought, if I can come up with 52 topics, then I'll know that this is good. And I sat down and I started writing. And a lot of them were just in the form of questions like, when do you know it's time to clean out the closet, and get rid of clothes? Some of them were silly questions. Some of them were more technical about what are the phases of grief, or when do you know that you're through or over grief, things like that. And when I sat down, my first list was over 70 items. And I thought, okay, there's enough to talk about here. And so we started, and we've still not exhausted that list because we keep getting new topics along the way. And many times it's because of a book. I read a lot and I write. So many times it's because of a book I've seen, a new book being released or something. And I thought, oh, I haven't thought of that. And that's how we'll get other topics. But yeah, podcasting is great. And it's a perfect format for talking about those things that are difficult to talk about. So, that'll be great. Good luck to you on that. That will be a lot of fun.
You.
And will certainly be one I'll subscribe to when you're ready to go for it.
Great. Thank you.
Before we wrap up, and we're, these
goes fast.
Go so darn fast.
Fly right by.
They really do. But before we wrap up, we've asked a lot of questions, or I've asked a lot of questions of you. But before we go, I want to give you a chance to speak directly to our listeners. And I don't know that you have anything personal to say to them, but as you mentioned, lots of people out there lose a sibling, whether it's a traumatic loss or whether it's because of a chronic illness. That situation doesn't matter. But when you lose a sibling, this is just your chance, Alyse, to talk directly to our listeners. We do have an international audience, and I'm sure out of those thousands and thousands of people, there are people that are dealing with the loss of a sibling. So what would you like to say to them?
I'd like to say just to try to keep those memories close and to, as I say this, it's hard for me to do, but to not feel like you've lost your sibling because you didn't lose them. I'm not an only child. My parents still have 2 children, and I still have a connection with him. He might not be here physically with me, but I notice signs. Maybe that's in my head, but it helps me. And I have had opportunities to do things that I honestly feel my brother has put in my path. And I would just encourage people to really try to think about what those memories are to you. And if you haven't lost a sibling, I would encourage you to hold your sibling a little tighter. And whether you get along or not, you have this shared history. And it's something really special. It's something you can't recreate with any other person. And even though I've lost my brother, that relationship remains probably one of the most special relationships that I've ever had, and I probably will ever have.
Right.
Well said. Well said. I think you need to put some of these words on paper. Just my opinion. So, listeners, it's that time. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation today with Alyse. Losing a sibling, again, I have one brother. He's very special to me. Sure, he annoys me. And he's going to hear that when he listens to this podcast. I know he is. But he only annoys me because he's fiercely protective of me. We are very, very close. And I treasure and feel very, very blessed to have him in my life. So I cannot imagine what life would be without him. But thank you, Alyse, for coming and joining us today and sharing with us very candidly the experiences and how you feel after the loss of your brother. Nick was his name? Was it Nick?
Yep.
Okay. So in memory of Nick and to honor Nick, we want to thank you so much for being here. And our listeners, we talk about self-care all the time. That's very, very important as you continue on your journey in grief. And we hope you'll come back next week and listen again. Who knows what our topic will be, but it'll be a good one, and we'll have a great guest for you to listen to as well. So take care of yourself as we all continue to live in grief.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, or do you have a question from one of our episodes? Please email us at info@asiliveinGrieve.com and let us know. We hope you will find a moment to leave a review, send an email, and share with others. Join us next time as we continue to live and grieve together.